and I'm the Educational Outreach Coordinator for the Cultural Ed Series. And I'm excited to welcome you to this Inspiring Audiences event. We have with us Kristi Athey. She's a third grade teacher at Flintstone Elementary, and she has a special interest in the Titanic and a personal connection to that story. So I would like to just go ahead and introduce her and let her tell us a little more about that.
Thank you very much. I've done this, so third time's a charm. And this is my husband Gary, and he's my little PR guy, so I need him desperately. But I guess I've just always been, I don't know if you'd call it an obsession, what you would call it with the Titanic. It's just something that's always been with me, and then you're going to find out in a few minutes why that is. It was a personal story, and we're going to start with a CNN clip. This cruise departed from Southampton, which is about 90 minutes south of London. It was April 8th last spring. And so we were lucky enough when we were in London, my sister called me up in my hotel room one night and said, "How would you like to be on CNN?" And I said, "Oh, that's a good one." And she said, "No, really." She said, "Tomorrow morning they want us there at 8 o'clock, and they want us in our period costume. They want us dressed up." So we were whisked away to CNN, and this is how I'm going to start my presentation with that clip. You looking for 111?
Yes.
Right here.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry about that.
April 15th will mark 1 century since the infamous luxury liner, the Titanic, sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That disastrous maiden voyage is now a global obsession, inspiring authors and divers and filmmakers. Artifacts, myths, and legends still shape the events of that chaotic evening and cold morning. The ship that was described as unsinkable is just another story to some people, but for others, it's part of their family history. Joining us from London are Titanic enthusiast Kristi Athey and her sister Nancy Pritchard. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
We can't help but notice your outfits. So tell us why you're dressed up like that, Nancy.
Well, we don't dress like this every day, just so you know. A couple of evenings on the cruise, we are allowed to wear a period costume for dinner, and this is what we're wearing. So this is why we are dressed this way today.
We're in fabulous. You look absolutely fabulous. Okay, so this cruise ship that you'll be taking to mark the 100-year anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, Kristi, does it look just like the Titanic did?
A lot of people mistakenly think that it does, when actually it looks nothing at all like the Titanic. Actually, we found out that our ship does not even travel as quickly as the Titanic did 100 years ago. They left on April 10th. We are leaving Southampton on April 8th, just so we can be at the exact wreck site at the time of the actual tragedy.
Interesting. So what about the inside of the ship, Nancy?
As far as I know, and actually my sister is the Titanic enthusiast, so she may be able to extrapolate a little further, but I think there is going to be some period decor. I know for dinners, probably everything is going to be set as it was in 1912 for the first class, I'm assuming, and the food we will be eating is period appropriate food. So we're looking forward to that.
So is it the exact menu, Kristi?
I don't believe all nights they will be serving the exact menu, but probably the nights when we are dressed, as we are now, will be the nights when they serve the foods that were very popular 100 years ago, including, I believe I did see somewhere, pigeon.
Oh, yum.
Yeah, we're not too sure about that.
I know, especially when we now call them flying rats, right?
Yes, exactly.
Kristi, you must be the family historian, so I want to ask you about your grandmother. She had a ticket for the Titanic, and then what happened?
We've always heard through family legends that her name was Annie Johnstone at the time, immigrated from Scotland. We had heard that she did book passage on the Titanic, but for reasons that we're still not quite sure of, she did not get on that ship.
And of course, we are quite thankful for that because she probably, more than likely, would have been a third-class passenger. And even though women did fare better during the Titanic incident, you almost had to be at the right place at the right time to find your way into a lifeboat. And we just don't know if that would have happened with her or not.
So you still don't have the ticket, because that would be really cool.
Oh, wouldn't that be
It would
wonderful?
be very cool. Yes.
We wish, but we do not.
Darn. We could see you on Antique Roadshow, like, finding out how much it's worth.
Oh my gosh.
I can't even imagine.
I know. Okay, so when the Titanic, or your cruise ship, not the Titanic, but when it gets to that point.
Yes, people make that mistake all the time. That makes us a little nervous.
Definitely. But when it gets to that point where the Titanic actually went down, Nancy, I think that would be a little creepy.
It may be a little creepy, but to be honest, we're not looking at it that way. For us, it's just a wonderful opportunity to memorialize the people that died that night, also to honor those who survived, but what a horrible tragedy they had to endure. And can you imagine the post-traumatic stress of watching your husband aboard the ship and then, the ship sinking? So I don't think it will be creepy. I think for us it will be very touching, actually. I think we'll be in tears.
Oh, so what do you hope to take away from it, Kristi?
Well, personally, I am a third-grade teacher of a small school in Western Maryland in the USA, and I teach a social studies unit every year on Titanic. And it has always been the favorite unit of all of the children, even those that really aren't big into learning. But some of them have said that they now want to be captains of ships. Some of them have brought in magazines and articles about things, and they've really never got this interested in any other topics, relating to any era in history. So that's one thing I definitely want to bring back, is more information that I can teach the children, because even though I think I know a lot about Titanic, I'm finding out that I don't know nearly as much as I ultimately hope to learn. CNN interview in London, and I just got this new little clicker toy, and I'm so excited. And it even has a laser pointer, so I'm hoping to be able to use that sometime tonight. But yes, as we said in the CNN interview, and that lady was Carol something. I'm sorry, I can't think of her name. But yes, she works, and she of course was in the Georgia office when she was talking to us in London. But this, of course, my first slide compares the Artemis Titanic that sailed in 1912, and this was our ship, the MS Balmoral, and both ships, and this was on purpose, of course, had 1,309 passengers. The Titanic, 100 years ago, was 882.5 feet long, and the Balmoral was much smaller, as many ships are these days. It was 715 feet long. So the Titanic in its time was just known as a behemoth. It was just a huge, huge ship. I believe at the time it was, they said, the largest man-made object on Earth. So it was just something. Now, of course, cruise ships are bigger these days, but back then it was just something to be reckoned with. This is a picture of the family members that we spoke of in the interview. My father is on the left. My grandparents are on the right. They both did live in Scotland. They came to America. My grandfather came to Frostburg in 1911 on a ship called the Caledonia with $50 in his pocket. All this was found through Ancestry.com, which I greatly recommend. It's free for the first 6 months, unless you forget to cancel your membership, which I did, and it wasn't free anymore. But it's a real wealth of information. I found out that my grandmother then we thought was going to come on Titanic for reasons still unknown to us. She did not. She waited 3 more years. She came through Ellis Island, as my grandfather did as well, in 1915, and she had $25 in her pocket. And it's just amazing that the amount of information you learn from Ancestry.com. And of course, we now are glad that she didn't make that trip, because chances are, even though she was a woman, she may not have survived being a third-class passenger. My father would not have been born, and I probably would not be standing here right now talking to you about this ship. This is an actual photograph of the Titanic as it is getting ready to depart Southampton, England. What a lot of people don't know is that when it did leave Southampton, it came within inches of hitting another ship called the New York. The Titanic was so huge, the propellers just had such a suction around them that it pulled a ship New York toward them. The moorings broke, and it was very close. They said within inches of hitting the ship, and many people thought, well, thank God that didn't happen. That could have been a disaster. But actually, if that would have happened, the Titanic probably would have been injured so much that it would have had to have stayed in dock for at least a day, maybe more than that. And who knows, the iceberg may or may not have been in that same position, and this whole disaster may not have happened. It might have just been another ship that did transatlantic crossings. But that was just an interesting little fact a lot of people don't know, except my student I had last year, Ronnie. You knew that, didn't you? You knew that. Also, another sad thing, a lot of people were transferred to Titanic from other smaller ships because there was a huge coal strike going on back then in England. And a lot of people, entire families, were not supposed to be on Titanic, but they were transferred at the last minute. And unfortunately, a lot of those families and the whole entire families did not survive that disaster. This is myself with 2 little newsboys. When we got on our ship, the Balmoral, they had people in period costume, including these little newsboys. They were nice enough to let me have their picture taken with them. A lot of people on our ship dressed in period costume every day. They had the big hats, they had the big dresses. A lot of the men had the bowler hats, and they just really went all out. And a lot of us did that twice or 3 times on the ship, but some people did it every single day. And I just brought something to show. I did not have this on the trip. I certainly wish now that I would have. But this is a typical, really nothing fancy, but this would be a typical first-class hat that the women wore back in 1912. And a lot of women that sailed 100 years ago, this wasn't enough for one day. They would change their clothing 2 and 3 times a day. So they would end up having, dozens of these hats that they would travel with. And you just can imagine then the people that they had to travel with. I mean, the first-class passengers were so wealthy. They had their valets and their maids and their butlers and their manservants and their maidservants. So they just, this was just one thing they wore for a few hours, and then they took it off and put something else on. And it was really, the first-class passengers on Titanic were in a class by themselves. They really were. I'll let you put that on. But, on our ship also, this day that we boarded, we found out that there were people from 28 different countries that were on our ship, on the Balmoral. So this really is not an American thing. I think Americans were the 4th largest population. Australians are really into the Titanic. Of course, the Irish, the British, and I think we were either 4th or 5th Americans, yes, on board the ship. I showed this picture of the newsboys because back then, 100 years ago, newspaper was one of the main, and for some people the only way to get information about big events like this happening. This is a very famous picture from the Titanic aftermath, the newsboy selling papers. I think this is in London. And this just goes to show how misleading sometimes newspapers can be. Several of the newspapers had huge mistakes in them. This was an Evening Standard. Looks like it comes out of Utah. Passengers from the Titanic rescued. Kind of gives you the impression that maybe they all were rescued, when in fact the total numbers were 32% of those on board Titanic were saved, And sadly, that means 68% were lost, and that includes the passengers and crew. But the odds were not good. Another newspaper tells us that 868 survived. We now know, well, the thing is, experts don't know the actual number. A lot of people say 705, a lot of people say 712. There were some stowaways on board that really weren't accounted for. Also, so many people from different countries, when they went into New York City and were asked to sign their names, sometimes some of the names were so foreign, people didn't know whether that was one name, whether that was two names, whether that was their first and second names, their middle name and last name. So an exact number of survivors really will never be known. And then this one really takes the cake. This one comes from Syracuse, and all passengers are rescued. And not only did all survive, but the liner is still afloat and is being pulled into Halifax, Nova Scotia. And that was printed, of course, before facts were known. And I always have to say, jokingly, and now we know that everything that's in the newspaper is 100% true. Not the case, but much more so than this. This is a replica, of course, of what a third class room would look like. This would, of course, be for 4 people. All men would be together. Women would be together, except, of course, family members. They have a nice little basin there for washing their hands. This would have cost third class passengers back then about $40 for the crossing. And back then that was just a large amount of money. Today, for a cabin, a small cabin on a cruise ship where you don't have a window, you don't have a view, you're kind of cramped into there, a single is going to be at least $800 to $1,000. They did have a sink in each room. They said the Titanic's third class was comparable to most cruise liners' second class. So they were actually nice little furnishings. One thing I just learned a few months ago which shocked me was that for the whole third class, all third class passengers shared 2 bathtubs. One was for the men and one was for the women. So that was kind of shocking to me. And then we go to the other end of the spectrum, and this is just one room of a first class suite. And you can see the major difference there. Some of the famous names you may have heard that had first class quarters, of course, John Jacob Astor, he was the richest man on the ship. Molly Brown, some refer to her as the unsinkable Molly Brown. Benjamin Guggenheim, a wealthy family from Philadelphia named the Ryersons also booked passage on first class, and sadly they were coming to America. Their son had just been killed and they were coming to his funeral, but they also were on the Titanic. Back then, $4,000 possibly would have booked passage for this room, and experts, and I say experts a lot, but the experts say today something comparable to this would cost about $83,000. So the first class passengers were, as I say, truly in a class by themselves. This was the room my sister and I had. And it's not a first class room, but you can see that for a cruise ship it was very nice. And we knew, well, we had a complimentary bottle of champagne when we got there, so that made it even nicer. But we knew we were going to be out at sea for 12 days, so we insisted that we had a balcony. Not that we were spoiled or anything, but we just really felt that we needed that view. You know, a lot of days we thought we were going to need that view, and we did. And one thing we were very surprised at as well is our bathroom to our room actually had double basin sinks, and neither of us have that in our own homes. So we were quite delighted by that. That was a very nice room. So I thank you for that. This is the path that Titanic took both 100 years ago and on our trip. Of course, use my laser pointer for the first one. Of course, we started out in Southampton. The Titanic traveled then to Cherbourg, France. We did not do that. But we went straight from Southampton to Queenstown, Ireland, which is now known as a cove. And then we traveled, here comes the big trip. You know, this took 6 days to get from Ireland to the Reykjavik. And unfortunately, that's where the Titanic stopped its journey. We then went north to Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and then we ended up in New York. But that was the path that the Titanic and our ship took. A lot of reasons why you can see pictures such as, no, not this one, I'll get back to that in a minute. But, no, I'll go back to that in a minute, I'll forget. But in Ireland, there was a man who got off the ship, and his name was Father Francis Brown. And he planned on getting off in Ireland. He was only going that far. And he was a Jesuit priest. He was also an avid photographer. And those days that it took him to get from England to Ireland, probably only a day and a half, he just went around the ship and took countless numbers of photographs. And that is why so many of the Titanic photographs are available to us now, because everyone else that stayed on the ship, of course, none of that film survived. So it's because of a man, Father Francis Brown, that we have so many photos that we can actually see of the Titanic itself. This was our stop in Ireland. This is an absolutely beautiful city. It was called Queenstown, Ireland. It's now called Cove. And this was taken from our ship, and you can see as we're coming into the port just how beautiful it is. And then we were really surprised because this is the crowd that awaited us when we pulled in. And we were just blown away, and they were singing songs, and they were just very happy to see us because Titanic was built in Ireland. It was built in Belfast, and they take great pride in their ship. It took 11,000 workers 3 years to build the Titanic. And a lot of Irish like to say, and I think this is a little dig at the Brits, but they say that the Titanic was fine when she left us. They take great pride in their ship. So we had about 6 hours to spend in Ireland, and what do you do when you're in Ireland? You go to a bar and you drink a pint of Guinness. And that's what we did. We went to the bar, we asked everyone where should we go, and they said, we recommend Kelly's. So we went to this little bar called Kelly's. You can see the White Star Line insignia in the window. That is the line that built Titanic. Titanic was built by the White Star Line. And anywhere where you saw this, you knew that we were welcome to go in, and people in Ireland, it's our second time there, but we think it's the friendliest people we've ever met. We were in this bar, and we were sitting in the back room, and there was a band playing, and I said to my sister, listen to that song, and honestly, the band was playing Country Roads, the John Denver song, Country Roads. My husband went to WVU, so I had to call him right away, and text him and tell him about that. But that made us feel a little bit more at home. But yes, Ireland treated us wonderfully. Then we got back on the ship, and we knew it was going to be a long haul. Our next destination, I guess you could call it, was the wreck site. So it was 6 days on the angry North Atlantic seas until we got there. And during that time, we had a lot of lecturers, we had a lot of historians, a lot of experts talk to us. And this is one of my favorite times of the whole trip. This man's name is Jack Eaton. He's a historian and expert on the Titanic. He was one of the lucky ones that has had the chance to dive in a submersible to the Titanic. This was a while ago. He's getting up there in age now. But if you do dive in a submersible to Titanic, like this man and several others have, the Titanic rests 2.5 miles down in the North Atlantic Ocean, and it takes you 2.5 hours to get down there. You have to go so slowly. The water pressure down at the bottom of the Atlantic is 6,500 pounds per square inch, the water pressure. So it's a very dangerous thing. And I think for about $80,000, you two can do that. That's just something and then couples have gotten married there. I mean, some people really, enjoyed this. It's a very small submersible. Only 3 people can fit in it at one time. But I read about 4 or 5 books written by this man, and to meet him was a true honor for me. Also, we had a lot of experts and lecturers talk to us about the Titanic. Some things I knew, some things I did not know. This is an actual picture of the bridge of Titanic in 1912. That night, they really had all the cards stacked against them. There were no binoculars. No one seemed to know where the binoculars were. There had been 6 ice warnings posted and given to Titanic. Captain Smith may have gotten some of them he may not have gotten. J. Bruce Ismay was the owner of the White Star Line. Rumor had it he wanted to go a little faster. He wanted to make headlines. He wanted to have his ship not only be the most extravagantly beautiful, but the fastest as well. And another thing going against them that night was that the seas were so calm, you really couldn't see anything splashing up against an iceberg. So that you would think the calm sea was a good thing, but it was not in that case. This is what the bridge looks like of our ship. I was just out one day and I decided to just look up and take a picture of the bridge. Of course, you can see now everything's electronic, everything is has so much more technology. And I remember we were getting close to the wreck site at this time. I was out by myself. It was just a few hours before we'd gotten to the wreck site. And I looked up, and I don't think you can see it there, but there was someone's reflection that I could see, and the person could see me obviously too. And the person waved to me, and I waved back. And I remember thinking, you shouldn't be looking at me. You should be looking way out there. There were icebergs there 100 years ago, so chances are, you never know. But I just remember that time because we were close to the site and everyone's emotions were really starting to change and we were all starting to get a little bit somber. This is my sister. She bought a new LL Bean coat for the trip because she knew she was going to need it, and she did. The average temperature of the air during our trip was 45 degrees. The water temperature was 28 degrees. And this was our little balcony that we insisted on having. And you can see that day the seas were a little rough. This is me sitting in the balcony as well. Between Ireland and Nova Scotia, when we got to Canada, we did not see land for 6 days. At some points, we had 30-foot waves. Some people told us they did not leave their room for 3 days because the waves were so bad, and some people just really didn't have a good time of it. When you left your room in the morning and you saw the little white bags along the hallways, you knew what they were for, and that you knew it was not going to be a good day. And then also we had someone from the BBC broadcasting our trip, and he had some type of a heart malfunction, a heart problem, and we were almost a day into our journey to the wreck site, and we had to turn around and go back into those rough seas, and then he had to be airlifted and sent back to Ireland. So everyone was kind of upset about that. The first thing we said was, oh, we hope he's okay, and then we said, but we really hope we get to the wreck site on time, because then rumors started that we might not have gotten there on time, and we might have been late for the exact 100th anniversary. So he was fine, by the way. And this is my sister and myself, and this is just a few hours before we were actually over the wreck site. And again, just like reflecting 100 years ago, there was a flat calm. You can see the seas had calmed down. There was no moon that night, and as we all stood around the deck, there were a multitude of stars, just like the survivors remember having 100 years ago. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the famous Jack Rose, the Titanic movie, and this is actually what the front of a ship looks like. This is the bow of our ship. And as you can see, there's no way now that you can have your king of the world moment, and there's no way you can even get near the very bow of the ship. And people even said that James Cameron may have taken some liberties with his film, and there's no way that Leo DiCaprio could have done what he did in that movie. But as Ronald, my former student, knows, the first thing I tell my kids, because the first thing they want to know when we talk about Titanic, or they want to know all about Jack and Rose, and I have to break a few hearts and tell them that they were not real people, they were fictional, and a lot of them argue with me about that. But it was a great movie. So the Titanic hit the iceberg at 11:40. And what we did at 11:40, we were all, of course, outside. It was quite cold that night. The captain came on the loudspeaker system and told us that it was now 11:40 and that 100 years ago what had happened. And then we had about 3 moments of silence, and he blew the ship's whistle. And then we went inside for a memorial service. And one of the things we did during the memorial service was look at these 3 wreaths that were going to be thrown overboard later. And some people mistakenly thought, oh, there are 3, that must be one for the first class passengers, one for second, and one for third. And the staff of the cruise ship told us that that absolutely was not the case, but it was just for optimal viewing. One was going to be thrown off the stern, and then the other 2 would be thrown off of the port side and the starboard side. And then this next frame shows those 3 reefs, and there we had 3 deckhands on board. And this was a very moving experience. Every single person was at the back of the ship, at the stern of the ship, and I must admit, thinking, if we're all at the stern of the ship, yeah, we're going to start. So sometimes my ways of thinking, I'm not as technologically, I guess, advanced as I should be. But that made me a little nervous, but we were all on the stern of the ship. At exactly 2:20 was when the Titanic finally sunk totally. And so the 3 men picked up their wreaths and they threw them overboard, and that was a very moving experience as well. We had a band, and the band was playing the famous song "Nearer My God to Thee," which a lot of people think was playing when the Titanic sunk. And that was a time that I can say I'll never forget that. People were going back and forth about what song was the band actually playing. Some people say it was another song, but we'll talk about the band in a minute, and I don't think it matters what song they were playing. The point is, people were dying, and they didn't even try to get into a lifeboat. They kept playing, so I think that's the main thing to remember there. This is a picture of an iceberg that may have been the iceberg that sunk the Titanic. This was taken from a passenger on board the Carpathia, the rescue ship. This particular iceberg at the time was 3,000 years old. Excuse me. And about 7/10 of an iceberg is underwater. So the part that's sticking up is only a small portion of what really is under there. This iceberg had just turned over, because icebergs, of course, are free floating pieces of ice, and sometimes they just roll over, and then they are called a bluebird. And the part that has just been submerged, which is now above, is very, very dark blue because of the water still in the iceberg. So this was even harder to see that night. And Frederick Fleet was up in the crow's nest, was the first to see the iceberg. Strangely enough, people say 15 seconds before, if the iceberg would have been sighted 15 seconds before, they think they would have steered away and they would have missed it totally. If it was sighted 15 seconds afterward, there would have been more of a head-on collision, and people would have been killed that were in the front of the ship. But they think that the ship would have been able to limp itself or be pulled back to shore, that it would not have sunk. So it was almost like they were just right in the middle of 2 terrible times. 15 seconds before, you'd have been okay. 15 seconds after, you would have been okay. But again, bad luck that night all around. This was a picture taken from the Titanic's deck. And as you can see, the lifeboats really do take up a lot of room. A lot of people thought that they were not abiding by the lifeboat rules back in 1912. Actually, they were. They had 4 extra boats than were needed. They originally wanted to have 48 lifeboats. That went down to 32 from the designers. That went down to 16, and then they had 4 collapsible boats that had canvas sides. Out of all the boats that were released, 1 boat came back and rescued about 10 bodies. Some of those did die. But that was sad that of all the boats, and I think they were, of course, fearful for their lives, because here they see this gigantic ship, and they, of course, think that when it goes under, it's just going to have this massive wave and this massive suction, and really that did not happen nearly as much as people were afraid of. Men that went onto the starboard, which is the right side of the ship, were welcome to get in the lifeboats if there were no more women and children around. Then on the port side, we're told by the officers that even if there was room, that there were absolutely no men at all allowed on the boats. So you kind of, if you were a man, had a 50-50 shot, just depending on if you took a left turn or a right turn onto whether you were going to get into a lifeboat or not. This is one of the collapsible boats, and this was picked up by a rescue crew. And actually, it never did upright itself. They got it off the ship and it stayed upside down. About 30 or 40 men stood on that boat, the way you see it, for over 3 hours, just leaning, holding on to each other and leaning back and forth. And that's the way they found their way into another lifeboat and survived. But a scary fact. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you have gone on cruises, and this is what your lifeboat looks like now. This one, I believe, fits up to 150 people. And of course, you have to have your lifeboat drill now, usually before you leave shore, but definitely within 24 hours. But no lifeboat drill was ever done on the Titanic. People really didn't even know what way they were to go. The officers didn't know what they were supposed to do. So, times have changed, and it's in great part because of Titanic. This is Captain Edward James Smith. This was going to be his last voyage. He was 62 years old. He was going to take the Titanic back to England, and then he was going to be done. He was going to retire. And I showed this picture of him with his dog. This dog was not with him on the trip, but there actually were 10 dogs on board the Titanic at the time. 3 of those dogs survived, and they were tiny little lap dogs that belonged to rich first-class women, and they just kind of could wrap them in their big fur coats, and no one seemed to mind that 3 dogs were in lifeboats. And another interesting story, I'm such an animal lover, an interesting story that I loved hearing was John Jacob Astor, the richest man on the ship, perished. He did not make it to a lifeboat. He asked and was told no, and he just said thank you, kissed his wife, walked away. And one of the things we heard that he did was went down to where the dogs were kept in the kennels and released all the dogs from their kennels, so at least they had a chance for survival. So that's one of my favorite things about the story. Here's the rescue ship. This is the Carpathia. It was a Cunard liner. It was going in the opposite direction. It was going to the Mediterranean. The captain was Stanley Bullard. You can see that it is much smaller than the Titanic, with only its 1 smokestack. It had to dodge icebergs to try to get to the Titanic. Many times it almost struck icebergs itself. It heard the SOS signal on the Marconi wireless system. A lot of people think SOS is save our ships or save our souls. Really, it doesn't mean any words. It's just something that is easily recognizable on the Marconi wireless system. And so, thank God they heard it, and they did save the people that were saved. So then after the Titanic site, our next destination was Canada. And here we come to Halifax, which is in Nova Scotia, which is an absolute beautiful place. You had a sunken ship, and then you had 1,500 bodies in the water. And a lot of these bodies were carried away in the very swift Labrador currents. But many of the bodies, because they all had their life jackets on, so they didn't drown, they actually froze to death. So a lot of them are still bobbing in the water. And they knew that these bodies would have to be recovered. So Halifax sent out a lot of rescue ships. One of them was the Mackie Bennett, and this is, I believe, a picture of that ship. And the Mackie Bennett, they have just recovered a body, and they are getting ready to bury this body at sea. Some, if they could be recognizable, were packed into ice and taken back to Canada, to Halifax. A lot of them that were not recognizable were buried at sea. Unfortunately, it's sad to say that a lot of them that looked like they may have been third-class passengers were buried at sea. But if they looked like that they were wealthy, if they had a lot of items on them that appeared to be a wealthy passenger, they were taken back because they wanted to be returned back to their families, the crew thought. And what they were supposed to do was give everybody a number, and then they would collect all their personal items. And after a while, if the bodies were not recovered, then they were to burn the personal items because they didn't want looters or fortune hunters to come and invade something and say, oh, look, I have something that was on the Titanic. So a lot of the bodies, different things happened to many of the bodies, just depending on, unfortunately, what they looked like, what they had on them, and such. This is one of the saddest stories. We are in Nova Scotia now, and we go to a maritime museum, which was a wonderful place. This was a small pair of shoes belonging to a toddler, and they recovered a body. These shoes were on the body. They were to burn the clothes. They buried this little body. Unfortunately, they couldn't identify the baby. He looked like he was a third-class passenger, but they did bury this little baby. The clothes were burned, but the man, his name was Clarence Northover, and he could not bring himself to burn these shoes. So he just tucked them away in a closet, and it was kind of forgotten about until the year 2002. And he had a grandson, Earl, and he remembered his father talking about this story, and they did exhume the body, and DNA evidence did find out for the family that this little boy, who they always called the unknown child, actually was known. His name was Sidney Leslie Goodwin. He and his whole third-class family perished, and sadly they were one of those families that were not even supposed to be on the Titanic, but because of the coal strike were transferred. And I believe this is a picture of his grave that is in Halifax, and it's always covered with toys, little stuffed animals, other little items. And so this is one of the graves where you'll find people gathered around often. We talked about the band before, whether they played Near My God to Thee or whether they played a song called Autumn, doesn't really matter. Every witness that was interviewed said that yes, they did play. None of them even tried to make it into a lifeboat. And one of the band members was buried also in Halifax. He was a violinist, of course. He had beautiful flowers on his grave that day. His name was John Hume. They called him Jock. And his grave was beautifully decorated. He was a second-class passenger. The band traveled as second-class passengers. He was 21 years old when he perished. The band was pretty much young for the most part.
Question. What did that 193 signify on the stone?
That was just the number that he was given, his identification number. Even if they could recognize the bodies, they were still given the number. Yeah. These little boys were kidnapped from their mother. They were French. Their father, we thought his name was Louis Hoffman. He traveled by an alias. He and his wife were going through a very bitter divorce. He took these boys. The names at the top are not correct. Someone just put that on there. Their names were actually Michael and Edmund Navratil. And the last thing their father did for them was put them in a lifeboat, and then he perished. He knew he wasn't going to be able to get into a lifeboat. They are in New York City. They can't speak English, so for several days no one has any idea who they are. They are scared to death. Finally, they put something in a newspaper. It gets back to France, and the mother does recognize them and comes back and claims them as her children. And then later on in their later years, they did remember saying that when their father put them into the lifeboat, the last thing he said to them was, "Tell your mother I loved her, I'm sorry, and I always will." So that was another sad story. His grave, because he traveled by the alias of Louis Hoffman, there were 3 cemeteries in Halifax. This was a Jewish cemetery. Thinking he was Michael Navratil, of course, that's going to be it. He's going to go in the Jewish cemetery. And they later found out he was Catholic. But they kept him in the Jewish cemetery anyway. And one thing a lot of Jewish people do is they place rocks on the graves, and that's why so many rocks are right there. And this is what most graves look like. It just has the date that the body died, and then their identification number. So sadly, that's all most people have to show for themselves, is a date and a number. Another sad grave. This is Alma Paulson. She was traveling with her 4 children. The husband was already here in America. He was sending for them to come over. They traveled as third-class passengers. Her body was the only one recovered. Her 4 children's bodies never were recovered. But they put all names on the grave, and this is another grave that just brings tears to your eyes. It's always covered with little kids' toys and animals as well. Along with bodies, of course, we're going to find pieces of the ship. And I guess it's an old sailing tradition for sailors when they find pieces of shipwrecks to carve them into things. This was in the museum in Halifax as well. I think someone told me this is a cribbage board. I really don't know what that is. But they said that, they would carve them into games, picture frames, or whatever, and it was a real honor for a sailor to have something like this in his home. So that was Halifax, and then we left Halifax, and of course the ultimate goal is to reach New York City. So there we are. We reached New York City on it was the April 19th. It was very, very early in the morning. I've been to the Statue of Liberty several times, but I've never seen it from this angle. And then when we're just thinking about what those passengers, the survivors, must have been thinking when they sailed past the statue, this was supposed to be their happiness. And a lot of them still were hoping that their husbands and brothers and sons were going to appear on another rescue ship, and of course it never survived. It never happened. But the Carpathia, the rescue ship, brought the survivors on April 18th. It was 9:30 p.m. at night. There was a terrible thunderstorm going on at the time. They had been on that ship for 3 days, not knowing anything. And when they arrived in New York City, there were 30,000 onlookers. So I guess paparazzi had already, become to be a pestering thing. And of course they were shouting, even at some of them, asking them for questions, asking them to give interviews for money. And of course people were told not to talk to them. This is Pier 54 right now in New York City. You can see the Empire State Building in the background. But this is where the Titanic docked. And usually, of course, all immigrants had to go through Ellis Island. But because of the trauma and because of the anguished feeling that a lot of these passengers had, they didn't make them go through Ellis Island. They just took them all to waiting family members. If there were no waiting family members for some of the third-class passengers, they had no one. So there were special groups that would take care of them and, help them with food and money and supplies until they could go to wherever they needed to go. A lot of them just turned right around and went back to Europe. They just couldn't get through any more of it. And this is my last slide. This is what the Titanic looks like today. Sadly, it's 2.5 miles down in the North Atlantic. It is covered with rusticles, and rusticles is just what it sounds like, similar to icicles, except it's rust. And it's basically killing the ship. Experts say that in 25 years there's going to be nothing down there but a pile of rust. And this is a big conflict now that people are having. This ship is now owned by a company called RMS Titanic Incorporated, and they want to bring everything up. They want to bring as much up as they possibly can to be placed in museums for more people to learn about life 100 years ago. And then there are people, such as Bob Ballard. He found the ship in 1980, and he says nothing should be brought up. It's a sacred place, it's a graveyard, it should be kept as it is. But, think of what you will. There are really, conflicting stories on both sides, and people feel strongly about what they do. There are many wonderful Titanic museums all across the world. We've been to several, and I think that what you can learn from those items far outweighs these things just lying and getting ruined 2.5 miles down. And then the last thing I'll say is, in 2016, there is a billionaire from Australia, and he's talked about building a ship that he actually will name the Titanic to. And he wants it to look exactly like the Titanic. Of course, now with safety regulations, it will have to have more lifeboats, it will have to have more safety features. But I think we're going there. Honestly, I don't know if that ever will come to fruition, but it's something that someone is thinking about, and he does have the money, so that might be the next big thing that we hear about the Titanic. But again, thank you for coming. I love talking about it. You can see it's my passion. I really do love talking about it, and thank you again. Great. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, but there is no way that I probably will be able to. And I know a lot of you want to see the movie at 8 o'clock, so we got to get rolling right along.
What's your favorite meal while you were traveling across the ocean?
My favorite meal, we did have lobster several times, and that, of course, was a favorite. Some of the oddities, we had oxtail soup one night and quail eggs, which I don't recommend to anyone.
Which the oxtail soup?
Neither. But especially the quail egg. It was kind of bad.
Well, thank you very much.